AI is transforming industries, but what happens to the economy when machines can do most work? Anton Korinek, economist at Brookings and the University of Virginia, has spent years studying the impact of AI on labor markets. In this guest lecture, he joins Beatrice Erkers in conversation to explore the biggest questions about AI and the economy. Who will benefit, who will be left behind, and how we can adapt before it's too late.
I'm very happy to have Anton Korinek here. Anton, it would be very nice to just hear you introduce yourself and tell us about what it is that you're working on.
Hi, Beatrice. Thank you so much for having me. I'm Anton Korinek. I'm a professor of economics at the University of Virginia and a visiting fellow at Brookings. Yeah, and my area of specialty is to study the economic effects of advanced AI with a focus on what's ahead, on what to expect in the next couple of years as AI is continuing to advance.
Yeah, and I think that this is something that probably most people aren't thinking about this yet, basically, like what are going to be the effects of advanced AI developments? Could you provide a bit of color on it? Like in the next 10 years, like by 2035, what do you think is most likely to happen? And I think that could be both, like if you think there are things that are going to be like major challenges, but also if you think there are things that are maybe could be good for the economy.
Yeah, in the next couple of years, I expect that we will have machines, AI systems that can perform essentially any cognitive task that humans can perform. And we'll have physical machines, robots, that can perform any human task probably soon after. So nobody knows when exactly this is going to happen. There are aggressive predictions out there that say this may be before the end of 2026. I think we shouldn't discount the possibility. And the medium prediction is it will take a little bit longer, but it may well happen before the 2030s. And I also wouldn't discount the possibility that it will take more like 10 years. But no matter what, I think we should be prepared for these rapid technological advances. Now, you were asking, what does that mean for the economy? So there's the good part and there's the maybe more challenging part. The good part is that in some sense, right now, you could say human workers are the fundamental basis of the economy that underpin all the economic growth that we have. But in that sense, humans are also the bottleneck to further economic growth. And once you have machines that can do everything, that bottleneck is suddenly removed and the economy can grow much faster, can almost explode, especially if these machines are easily reproducible, which is the case for AI systems. And for robots, it takes a little bit more time to reproduce them, but we will probably get there soon enough as well. So that means the economy can grow much faster. It can produce much more of all the goods and services that underpin our physical wealth, that also underpin our psychological well-being if we steer everything right. But what's the challenge? The challenge is that labor is not only very important for the economy as a whole, but right now is also the main way through which the majority of people earn their income. So if you suddenly have all these cheap AIs and cheap robots flooding the economy, it may well happen that wages will go down, that people say, I can either hire the cheap AI or a human worker, and I'll hire the human only if they are correspondingly cheap. And that would put pressure on wages. And if we don't manage that situation well, it could lead to the immiserization of large fractions of our population, including all the cognitive workers like you and me.
Yeah, and what has this happened before in history? Is it comparable to the Industrial Revolution or anything like that?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question. I would say we have regularly seen episodes in which specific types of workers were suddenly replaced by machines. And then we've seen employment and wages go down in those specific sectors. For example, we don't even need to go all the way back to the Industrial Revolution. But let's say if you were a steel worker in the Midwest in the US in the 1970s, you have seen your income go down since. And a lot of industrial workers have actually seen income declines. There have been employment declines over the past 4 decades. Now, if you are, for example, a programmer right now, you'll see that there are suddenly way fewer job openings. There are suddenly a lot of big tech companies that are laying off programmers because generative AI has become so good that it can not do everything yet, but it can do a significant fraction of the tasks that programmers can perform. And that means the tech companies need fewer of them. So I think we can see and we have seen episodes like that in individual areas. Now, what's going to be different once we have these advanced AI systems is that this is going to be a much more general phenomenon. So at first, as I mentioned, I expect this to affect the cognitive workers for whom the main value added is essentially their intellectual work. And AIs are getting better and better at that and may soon be able to perform the majority of that. And there's going to be this period, I believe, where physical workers, your traditional blue-collar workers, will actually be better off than purely cognitive workers. But that won't last very long. At some point, and I think it's going to be within the next 10 years, both the cognitive, the intellectual work, and the physical work will be largely automatable. And that means there's going to be this pressure on wages and employment across the labor market. It's going to be stronger in areas where there are a lot of competitive forces. It's going to be weaker in areas where we choose that we want to have humans continue to perform things, even though the robots or the AIs can perform these tasks just as well or better than the humans. But let's say, for example, let's take care workers. Perhaps even if we have really skilled robots, maybe we'll still want humans to perform that kind of labor. And so then there's going to be more demand for that. Or let's take judges or lawmakers or things like that. I can well imagine that we may still want humans to perform that, even though AIs can perform those functions intellectually just as well as humans. So there's going to be a lot of differences in how this will play out in different parts of the economy. But from a big picture perspective, I think we should expect that the role of human labor in the economy is going to be less than it is now once we reach that period.
And then, so you had said with the programmers, so that's already happening?
Yeah, with programmers, this is already happening. So I think I just looked at a graph of that where I saw demand for programmers is down something like 75% compared to the peak, which was just 2 years ago.
Wow, I didn't know that was really happening.
So this is demand as in new job openings.
Yeah.
Obviously, there are still a large number of programmers employed right now, and we will still need them for some time. I'm just saying the new hiring is really down significantly.
Yeah. And so, like you mentioned a bit, like maybe we will still want humans to be caretakers and like judges and these things. Are there any other jobs like that you think would be valuable, and do you think there will be new jobs, like jobs that we don't have now?
Yeah, so I think there's always going to be some new jobs. It will be different, though, from the way that it has been for the past 250 years. So in some sense, you can say for the past 250 years during the industrial age, the economy has always had this kind of churning, as we call it, in economics, where some jobs get automated, new jobs get created, and overall labor demand rises, and that means wages are rising. I'm not convinced that's going to continue once we have AI systems that are as broadly capable as what we discussed, once we have, as people call it, artificial general intelligence. So I think we should be prepared for the possibility that labor demand just won't be the same anymore. We will be in a new economic paradigm. And I think it's important to remember that the world as we know it today, where we have always had this kind of rising labor demand and lots of new jobs that are getting created, it's not always been like this. If you go back before the Industrial Revolution, for example, very few people lived the kind of lives that we live now, where you're doing some highly specialized job that is valuable for one specific organization or corporation. Back before the industrial age, the majority of people were essentially subsistence farmers. They tended to their plot of land, and their life was completely different. There wasn't a labor market like what we see today. And we won't go back to precisely that way, but I think what we should expect is that there's going to be a fundamental change in paradigm that's as extreme as going from an agrarian society to an industrial society. And that's going to be the essentially society in the age of AI that we are heading towards. It's also going to happen much faster than these past transitions.
So if we think this and we take this seriously, what do you think we should be doing now to prepare for this?
Yeah, that's, I think, one of the most important questions. And there are two ways of addressing that challenge that I identified. So first, I want to say, right now, we are not in that world right now. Right now, labor demand is still quite high. We can't really see a huge impact of AI on the labor market as a whole yet. We see maybe these individual pockets where there's a little bit of impact, but that's no different from all the technological changes that we have seen in prior decades. And that means right now we also don't need any fundamentally different measures, but we should think about what this future that's on the horizon will imply and how we can address that. And once we see more significant disruptions to the labor market, which, as I mentioned, I expect in the next couple of years, there are two approaches to how to address that. The first one is trying to support labor. And in the short run, I think that is something very valuable because our society is so heavily organized around labor being people's source of income. And in some sense, you could say that's also the easier option because it doesn't require our society to adapt fundamentally. In the longer run, however, I think we have to ask ourselves the question, does it even make sense to make humans work, let's say 40 hours, 60 hours, like many people do nowadays, in jobs that can be done as well or maybe even better by machines and robots? Do we want people to work away their lives when the machines can do these things much more easily and much better? And should we perhaps think about a different way of how to distribute some of the benefits of these amazing technologies without forcing people to do inferior work? So what that would imply would be new mechanisms of income distribution that would be ways like for example, universal basic income, universal basic capital, maybe compute allocations or robot allocations. There are lots of debates about how to optimally structure that, and the exact details probably don't even matter all that much, as the fact that we have some programs to spread around some of those amazing technological advances.
You mentioned compute allocations. Can you maybe explain a bit what that is?
Yeah, so the idea of a compute allocation. So compute is a term that captures the total computational resources that people use to run AI systems. And over the past couple of years, we could see that compute is becoming increasingly valuable. You can see this in the rising stock prices of chip makers. You can see this in the billions or tens of billions that the leading tech companies are spending on building compute. And so the proposal of compute allocations is essentially that every person should be given a certain amount of compute, a certain amount of chips, you could say, that will be valuable and that they can rent out for AI systems to employ, or that they themselves can use to run AI. Now, I don't want to prioritize this particular solution over others like a UBI or Universal Basic Capital, but I'm just mentioning it because it's one of the proposals that are out there.
I'll cut this out, but are you okay to go over a few minutes? Or do you
yeah, no problem.
Yeah, great.
And I was also late, right?
Yeah, it was because it was really interesting also. And I think you're okay, great. And can you, because I think universal basic income maybe is something that a lot of people are familiar with the term. Could you say a little bit more about universal basic capital?
Yeah, so universal basic capital is basically the notion that we shouldn't pay people a regular benefit as what a universal basic income would do, but instead we should give them a capital allocation that they can choose to invest, that they can choose to rent out to others. Now, what are the benefits and what are the disadvantages? The benefit is that it gives people kind of an ownership stake, and that may make them behave differently than if they just receive regular handouts from a UBI. The disadvantage is that ownership stake would also expose them to risk potentially. And if they have made bad investments, for example, then they could end up with very little. So what I personally think is we probably would want some combination of the two, so that we have both the benefits of a UBI, which is like a stable allocation of some income, and the benefits of a universal basic capital, which would be to give people an ownership stake. Yeah, in fact, one thing that I have advocated in the past is perhaps it is time now to institute something like a seed UBI. I call it a seed UBI because right now we don't need a UBI. Right now we don't have any huge impacts on the labor market from AI. But I advocate that we create the infrastructure to distribute a UBI. And if those labor market shocks come, maybe, I don't know, in 1 year, maybe in 2 years, maybe in 5 years, then we have the infrastructure in place, and that small seed UBI can be scaled up as we need it.
Yeah, that seems like a great thing to start thinking about right now. So I think these are examples of how we can make sure that sort of everyone benefits. Is there anything else? Is there anything else we can or should be doing to avoid like too much concentration of power right now for a few major players?
Yeah, you're hinting at, I think, a very important factor, which is it's in part driven by the economics of creating AI. So in that sense, it's actually, for economists, it's a natural development. But as these systems are becoming more and more expensive to train, the number of players that are actually able to afford this is shrinking. So if you look at the AI market right now, it's actually fiercely competitive. It's hard to keep track, but there are 5, 6, 7 labs that are very close in terms of the capabilities of their models. And every week, someone else is at the top of the leaderboard because AI companies are releasing better and better models so quickly, but they are also becoming more and more expensive. So if you look at the curve of the so-called scaling laws, and you look at the scaling that the leading AI companies are engaging in, the top models that they're producing have become 3 times more expensive every single year for the past couple of years. So that means a couple of years ago, we were talking about $1 million models. Now we are in the tens, hundreds of millions of dollars of models, and soon probably will be at the $1 billion model range. And that means more and more players are going to start dropping out if this continues. And that means there's going to be less competition in the market. And as economists, we are acutely aware what happens if you have little competition, and especially if you have a monopoly. What happens if you have a profit-oriented player that has a monopoly is they raise prices, they extract as much of the surplus as possible for themselves, and usually it also hurts innovation because they have less incentive to invest into new things. So that's the kind of the traditional story about monopolies. I think in this case, there are some similarities that we should worry about, but it's also going to be different. The first difference is that I don't think we need to worry about a slowdown in innovation right now because the space is so competitive and nobody, even those who come out with the best models, nobody wants to rest on their laurels. Everybody is striving to race towards AGI and probably beyond. But what is also different is that these systems are going to become so fundamental to our economies. It's not if you have a monopoly on, I don't know, sugar or a monopoly on steel or something like that, where you affect just a small slice of the economy. But these systems are going to produce knowledge workers working throughout the economy, and they are going to create a very significant fraction of the surplus in the economy, and that will give them significant economic power, but also significant political power. And so my main concern when it comes to monopolization of AI is not so much that they will extract all these economic rents, but that they will have so much power. And I think in the past, we have seen policymakers react to that when there are individual companies or sectors that have had too much power. And I would expect that policymakers will also react in a similar way if AI companies become extremely powerful.
Are there any specific policy ideas that you think we should prioritize right now?
Yeah, right now we are not there yet. So right now I think there is so much competition that we don't have to worry about excessive concentration. But what we do want is we want to have very strong governance frameworks in place. We want our government to have experts that understand how these systems work, that will be able to help govern them as they become more powerful, and that will enable government to have sufficient oversight over these systems as they approach human capabilities in more and more areas. So I think right now that's one of my main concerns, that government needs to have the capability to understand what's going on.
That's a very good point. I think some of your work also discusses AI-driven decision making in economic policy. Is that what do you think are like the opportunities and risks of delegating economic decisions to AI systems?
Very interesting. Yeah, so as these systems become smarter, I think all of us can feel the temptation that we are outsourcing more and more to AI. A year ago, I used AI systems to help me rephrase paragraphs. Nowadays, I'm using AI systems to help me write the proofs of my economic papers, and they are excelling at that. And as they become more powerful, all of us are going to be tempted to outsource more and more of the decisions to AI, in part because we can see that they are better and better at what we are giving them. And I think the same thing is going to be true in economic policy. Again, it's something where we are not there yet. Right now, nobody in the world would ask, let's say, ChatGPT, because it's the most popular one, how should we do monetary policy? Or how should we basically conduct other economic policies? Because these systems are not good enough for that yet. But we are moving that direction, and I'm sure, in fact, there are papers out there that show how monetary policymakers are using AI systems to evaluate what the market or what the public will react like if they make certain policy decisions. So AI is already becoming much more useful and much more integrated with economic policy making. And once we are at this stage of human level AI or AGI, there will be a growing tendency to rely on these systems to suggest the decisions themselves and to analyze what are the trade-offs. And what that will bring us to is ultimately the economic policy version of the AI alignment problem. So the alignment problem is, how do we make sure that ever more advanced AI systems follow what we want them to do? How do we make sure that they follow our human values? If we are in a more technical area, like economic policy making, what that means is we first want these systems to be accurate and to actually understand the policy issues at hand and the trade-offs involved appropriately. But secondly, we also want to make sure that they understand and respect the values that drive our economic policies, which will differ from government to government. Some of the values that I think are pretty universal around among most humans is we want a certain degree of equality, but we also want sufficiently good incentives. We want economic policy to give people and entrepreneurs some freedom. And different governments are going to choose a different balance between those two. And they're going to tell their AI systems to choose a different balance. But it's going to become critical that we are able to correctly convey that balance to the AI so that the AI will essentially implement the true preferences, and so that the AI does not go havoc, that we don't have alignment failures where, let's say, we tell the AI to make sure the economy grows, and as a result of that, we suddenly have catastrophic inequality. That would be an alignment failure. And so would the opposite, by the way. We don't want the AI to implement fully automated luxury communism at the expense of stifling economic growth. I think all of our societies want some trade-off between those two factors to just mention two examples. There are many more economic values out there, right? And we want the AI systems just like we want today's economic policymakers to account for all of them.
So if you had to envision a future economy where AI plays a like constructive and stabilizing role, like what would that look like? Are there any key institutions or economic structures that you think we should really start to put in place today to make it possible? Like, basically, what would it look like if it goes well?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, what I would put in place today is something like a seed universal basic income, just to make sure that we have covered people's basic needs if there is fundamental labor market disruption. But what would I like the world to look like, let's say in 10 years from now, which is roughly the time when my kids will become adults. And I'm fairly confident that by that point, we will have the kinds of AI systems that you and I have been discussing before, that will have essentially human-like capabilities or superhuman capabilities across the board. So what world would I like my kids to live in? First of all, I would want all their basic needs to be met. I would want them to have a sufficient level of basic wealth so they don't have to worry about bare necessities. And that requires some of the distributive mechanisms that we described before. I would want them to have agency, to have the ability to make choices about their lives. I have to say, I think if we have AIs and machines that are as capable as we are envisioning right now, I don't want my kids to have to work 40 hours a week. I think that would be a waste of their potential, to enjoy life and of their potential to focus on what makes them good humans. Uh, I think the meaning of life is not to spend all of our time working, but the meaning of life is much deeper. It's about how we spend our time, how we appreciate being around fellow human beings. And if you look at happiness studies, very few people say that ultimately, in the end, what makes them happy is to work more. But almost everybody says what makes them happy is to be around fellow humans and to enjoy time together.
Yeah, I think very good points. And I guess it's time for us to wrap up this conversation. We've already gone over, but it's been really interesting. Is there anything that you think we've missed touching on that you'd just like to make sure that we talk about as well?
I think the final point I would like to make is that there is this tremendous degree of uncertainty right now about what the future will hold and what our technological possibilities will be. And I think for some people, there's a bit of a tendency to say, this is so uncertain. Let me just put my head in the sand and pretend tomorrow is going to be like today. But I want to encourage all of our listeners to take this possibility that there will really be a fundamental paradigm change in the next couple of years more seriously, and to prepare for the possibility, because our ability to steer the future in a desirable direction is always better when we are prepared.
Yeah, I think, that's something that we really want to help with in this course. I will sneak in one last question, which is just if we think about this uncertainty, you were talking about your children, but they're still like quite a few years away from having to choose what they are going to study at university or anything like that. For someone who is in that position, would you suggest, like, is there anything in particular that one should study? Should one not study? What should one be doing now if one is in a position where they can steer their life to maybe help with these sort of things? What should they be doing?
I would say ultimately do what you are most interested in, whether that is programming, which is being rapidly automated by AI now, or the arts, where we can also see the AI make inroads, or whatever it is, follow your interests, keep an eye on AI, and keep an eye especially on how you can use AI to make progress in the field that you're choosing. But ultimately, don't think being overly strategic and thinking about what will AI replace faster, what will it replace less fast. It's not that productive, I think, because it's happening so quickly that we are talking about a difference in being automated half a year earlier or half a year later right now, if you decide what to study in college. There's the other possibility, which is to focus on jobs that have more of a physical component. And maybe in the short term, there's some benefits to that. But ultimately, I think main advice would be to follow your interests and use the AI to do good in whichever area you're choosing.
Yeah, that seems like great advice. And it's nice to hear that, yeah, I think that's going to be helpful for a lot of people.
Okay, great.
Thank you so much, Anton. I really appreciated your time.
Thank you for the interesting conversation. I think you picked your questions really well.